What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the weekend roundup. Plenty to get to. We're going to jump right in here, beginning with the Hudson River Derby. Of course, these two teams just played a few weeks ago in the U.S. Open Cup, a dominant win for the Red Bulls. Now, battle for New York in MLS. Red Bulls came out really, really well. Plenty of energy in the first half. That press was working. It was one of those games where NYCFC was doing absolutely nothing offensively, which seems to be happening a little more regularly and even dating back to sort of the end of their playoff run. That was a lot of relying on defense and the offense not exactly clicking. Of course, they had that terrific stretch during this regular season, but it was not a good performance, particularly in the first half. And then halftime came, and the Red Bulls just seemed to kind of run out of energy. They were lifeless in the second half. NYCFC starts to pick things up a little bit. Still not a dominant performance by any means, but a little more bite in the attack. And, I mean, Danny Higginbotham was talking about it all game long, and he's absolutely right. One of the luxuries Nick Cushing has, one of the beautiful things about this team, at least as it's presently constructed, they can hurt you, and all they need is that one chance. They don't have to play well to win games. And that is what you saw here. Santiago Rodriguez clips in a terrific ball for Tati Castellanos, who finishes really well, as he always does. And that's it. Win for NYCFC. That is 3 wins in a row after that really tough stretch right after Nick Cushing took over. Again, these have not been the greatest performances in the world. I still have some questions as to whether this team can get back to the levels they were at under Ronnie Deila. But they have turned things around. They deserve credit for that. Nick Cushing deserves credit for that. They're back picking up wins like they were before Ronnie Deila departed. And then the other part of this is that may have been Tati Castellanos' last contribution as a member of NYCFC. We'll see how things play out this week. It's certainly looking that direction, though. And I'll save all of my thoughts for a situation in which he actually does leave the club. But I don't feel great about this already. Him leaving, you lose your manager and your MVP. Or at least MVP caliber player. Your Golden Boot winner last year. I'm not worried about NYCFC long term. But those two things combined absolutely change the complexion of the Eastern Conference. So, for right now, you celebrate the win over the Red Bulls. And from the Red Bulls' perspective, you got to figure out how to play 90 minutes. It was 45, and then they just kind of were really not a factor in the game until the very end when they were chasing it. So, they might have been the better team over the 90, but they certainly weren't undeserving losers in the sense that they dominated the entire game. They dominated portions, but that was just basically in the first half and then couldn't do anything after that. Speaking of changing complexion in the Eastern Conference, I said when the Columbus Crew signed Cucho Hernandez, I expect him to be, or at least he has the chance to be, the most impactful signing any team makes either in the offseason or mid-season here in the secondary transfer window. This is why. Now, I didn't think he was going to do this right off the bat. But absolutely, if he was able to get going and click into gear quickly, he was going to change the narrative and the situation surrounding this Columbus Crew team. He's played 137 minutes of MLS soccer. He has 4 goals. The Crew have 7 points from those 3 games. He hasn't played more than, I believe it's 60-something minutes in any of those games. And so they cap off this really strong sort of midweek weekend with a win over their arch rivals, FC Cincinnati. Cincinnati had a good 10 minutes, and then the Crew just completely took over. You get the first goal from Cucho. Who else? Lucas Elorán sending him up off a set piece. And by the way, Cucho Hernandez is showing you how many different ways he can score goals, too. Because you look at him, not a threat on set pieces you would expect. And yet here he is scoring one. He is exactly what the Crew need. They need somebody to consistently put the ball in the net, and that is what he does. And so now all of a sudden they have gone from being, in playoff contention, but outside of the playoffs, looking up at that playoff line, to not comfortably in, but it's going to take some work for them to fall out, and I expect them to only get better as they figure out how to integrate him and how to play with him even more. They're going to be one of the most dangerous teams in the league, period, come playoff time. I'm already convinced. And it goes back to, again, part of what I said when they signed him. You look at the rest of this team, you still have Darlington Nagbe in there, you still have Zellerreal, Jonathan Mensah, Eloy Room. The spine of that team is the same as the one that won MLS Cup. And now you bring in one of the best strikers in the league. I'm all over this. It's almost going to be the inverse of when they won MLS Cup, because I was insistent all season when healthy they were the best team in the league. Nagbe missed some time, and so they didn't end up that way. The standings didn't suggest that. To me, this is going to sort of be the opposite of that, where the standings aren't going to tell you. The performances all season aren't going to tell you. That's the more important difference here. But they very well may be the best team in the Eastern Conference by the time this is all said and done. Would not surprise me in the slightest. They get a penalty late to make it 2-0. Lucas Elorán draws it and converts it. So they get the big win to jump themselves over FC Cincinnati. And now it's just a question of how high can they climb, basically. Your most bizarre rivalry game of the day, or the weekend, I should say, went to Orlando and Atlanta. 1-1 draw in which Josef Martinez and Alexandre Pato both hit the woodwork in stoppage time. It was basically Martinez hits the post, Orlando comes down, and Pato hits the woodwork as well. Either team could have won this thing. A draw doesn't do too much for either of them. I mean, if you're Orlando, it's fine. Atlanta just needs 3 points, and absolutely needs 3 points at home. Didn't get it. Thrilling game, though. Incredibly entertaining. Just ultimately ends in a draw there. A couple other things I wanted to highlight from MLS, not specific to rivalries. First, Austin FC scored late against FC Dallas, if you want to call that a rivalry game. Dallas played well, had a really good goal set up by their front three, Alan Velasquez to Jesus Ferreira to Paul Arriola. I was impressed with Velasquez. He had a couple really nice passes. You can just see the potential oozing from him. Once he figures it out, he's going to be a special player. But as FC Dallas have struggled with all season, again, they let the game slip away. They can't hold on to their lead. Diego Fagundes gets it back off of a bad turnover for Austin, so they get a point. Chasing them at the top of the Western Conference standings, LAFC get all three against Nashville. Giorgio Chiellini, Gareth Bale make their debuts. Gareth Bale's first touches in MLS were some impressive trickery. No shock there. Chiellini was complaining about the heat in Nashville. No shock there. But ultimately, they get the job done, start to integrate these two guys. Still fascinated to see how much they end up playing and what role they play as we move forward. But this new era of LAFC starts off in positive fashion. And finally, perhaps the most interesting result / discussion point coming out of this weekend in MLS. Chicago Fire get a second straight win by shutting out the Seattle Sounders. And remember, this is also the Fire team that blew a 2-0 lead last weekend in Cucho Hernandez's debut against Columbus, so it could be 3 in a row. They are playing much, much better. They're scoring really good goals. They are now fun to watch, kind of out of nowhere. They have all of a sudden become very entertaining and good. We'll see how long this lasts. I'm still skeptical they can push it all the way to the playoffs, but we've seen stranger things happen in this league. And particularly when you look at those last couple places and you're talking about Cincinnati, Charlotte, maybe Inter Miami, those are not teams I have a lot of confidence in, teams that have been there before. So there is absolutely a playoff spot for Chicago to go get if they can keep this up. Not convinced they will, but they're playing well enough that this is something worth paying attention to and recognizing. On the Sounders side, this is the third straight game they got shut out. They have lost 4 of 5. Right after, basically, I declared them back and said I'm not worried about them anymore. This is a question of whether they can go try and really contend with LAFC. And here they are still struggling to get into the playoffs. Now, they had gotten themselves in a good position, and then losing 4 of 5 obviously drops you right back out under the line. I am still not ultimately concerned. I still think they're going to make the playoffs, and I will not want to play them in the first round. But this is, again, worth monitoring and acknowledging. I'm not even willing to attribute this to a CONCACAF Champions League hangover because they figured it out. And then all of a sudden, they haven't figured it out again. Now, are they at full strength? No. But you look at that lineup they put out there, there's just no reason they should get shut out 3 times in a row. They built this immensely deep team so that when you have a piece or two missing, you still put a really good lineup out there. Right? There's nothing to hold these guys for. Your Jordan Morrises, your Nico Laderos, Albert Rusnak, you go down the list. They're playing all these games. And so, yes, you've got some squad rotation when you're playing midweek, weekend. But to not score in any of them, I mean, I am concerned about the Sounders becoming what I thought they were going to be by the end of the season. I'm not concerned about them making the playoffs. That's how I will put that. We also are getting very close to having our quarterfinals for the Euros set. We're waiting on one more team Monday afternoon from Group D, depending on those last group stage match day results. What we do know as of Monday morning recording this, England's going to play Spain. Terrific matchup there. Germany, Austria. Sweden is the team waiting to find out their opponent, second place in Group D. France has already clinched first place in Group D, so they will face the Netherlands regardless of how their final game goes. Not too many shocking results over the weekend, but a couple things to note. First, it was a little chaotic for a little bit there in Group C. Switzerland gave the Netherlands a really good scare, a Netherlands team that just cannot catch a break in this tournament and has really struggled to get going, in part because of the injuries they've suffered, and now Vivian Miedema out with COVID. We'll see if she can get back for the quarterfinals, but just seems like one thing after another is going wrong for the Dutch. It looked like it might end in a way earlier than expected exit, but they hang in there to keep the 1-1 that they need, and then the floodgates just open once they get the second, and all of a sudden they're runaway winners in a game that was way more competitive than the final score suggests. So they do rise to the occasion and get it done. Sweden gets it done, no problem. So those are your two teams coming out of Group C, as expected. But like I said, more stressful for the Netherlands than maybe it should have been. But once they got it going, they just scored and scored and scored again. The one really, and shocking is disrespectful to Austria, but surprising development, I'm going to count it over the weekend, Friday. And I'm going to have more of this in my 5 things from the week column, but Norway, again. You know exactly what you have to do coming into that final game against Austria. You know you have to win. They didn't seem up for it. They didn't seem particularly resilient, and it never really looked like they were going to make it happen, especially after they conceded the goal and gave themselves even more work to do. And this is the last time Ada Hegerberg reached the knockout round of a major tournament was the 2015 World Cup. Now, yes, I recognize Norway have reached the knockout round of a tournament without her. That plays into my point, though, is that for whatever reason, 2017 Euros, these Euros, have both ended in massive disappointments, and those are the last 2 tournaments Hegerberg's played. And I have no reason to believe Hegerberg is the problem. This is not a Cristiano Ronaldo situation where you can see the impact on the collective. It's just so hard to make sense of what is happening. You gotta just start from square one, basically, coming into next summer's World Cup. The talent is obviously incredible. You've got a chance to win that tournament. But it's to the point where continuing to do the same thing over and over and expecting different results is the definition of insanity kind of thing. So we'll see how the Federation handles all of this, what the team ends up looking like heading into that tournament. But again, massive disappointment for Norway, for Hegerberg in her return. They were more competitive than they were in the 2017 Euros, but you look at it objectively and they should have gotten out of that group. Again, you do catch a tough break, though, because this is an Austrian team that has proved they are very good, particularly in these tournaments and these sort of knockout, individual game situations. And so it's not the most shocking thing in the world because you only had 2 teams that could come out of this group, and 3 of the best 8 teams in the tournament, I would argue, are in that group. So it's not... The idea of Norway not getting out of the group is not humiliating in and of itself, but the way they lost to England, their inability to really respond, leads to major questions heading into the World Cup. Like I mentioned, last team from Group D will be decided Monday. That will be Sweden's opponent. And now we get to the really good stuff where all of these teams that kind of we've been trying to figure out exactly how they stack up with each other, but it's been a little bit difficult because the groups aren't particularly well balanced and the gaps between some of these teams are so wide in the group stage. Now we got the good stuff. And really, there's no team in here I'm willing to dismiss. Of the 7, that runner-up from Group D is going to have a really tough time, both because Sweden and because they're the 8th best team in this 18 of the 8 teams remaining. But the 7 we know for sure as of this moment: England, Spain, Germany, Austria, Sweden, France, Netherlands. There's no real weak link there. I mean, certainly some are in better positions than others, but this is going to... You can see any of these teams finding a way to get through to the semifinals, and once you get through the semifinals, who knows what happens. So this should be a fascinating quarterfinals. Right, there's no sort of Cinderellas coming in here where some of your favorites don't get out of the group stage like you see sometimes at these tournaments. No, the best teams have, by and large, risen to the occasion, and so now we get to see them all play each other, and we're going to have a terrific quarterfinal, and really looking forward to everything as we get deeper into that tournament. That is all we've got for this morning. Be sure to subscribe, hit that red button so you don't miss any of the video content. Also subscribe on Substack, touchlinetalk.substack.com. There'll be no live show this week. I'll send out a programming note on Substack as well, but I will be traveling for a profile story. I'll share a little more about that at some point down the road, hopefully. So keep that in mind, and we will see you next time.